Can you train well and lose weight at the same time without causing problems? Possibly. Welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. My name is Will Frantz. I'm a running coach and a strength coach, and I help athletes get stronger and improve their performance in distances ranging from 5Ks to 200 miles. The whole goal of this podcast is to help you train a little better so you can improve your performance and have more fun out on the trails. If you like this information, I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe or follow, or even just leave a rating or review, or maybe share it with someone. All of those things will tell the algorithm robots that someone likes this podcast, which allows more people to find it, which spreads the information farther. So if you do any of that, I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, today on the podcast, I have another interview after last week, which is one of the reasons I didn't do a short one this week. Too much stuff. This week it's with Registered Dietitian Alex Larson. She has worked with a ton of endurance athletes, and we got together on the podcast to discuss food and how it interacts with your training, from fueling to carb loading to recovery. And as I mentioned in the little bumper at the beginning, weight loss. I'm going to be honest, the weight loss portion was a relatively small part of our overall conversation. But whenever I mention anything about weight in the title, download numbers go way up. And I'd really like more people to hear this interview, because not only was that part of the conversation a little different than anything I'd heard elsewhere, or at least recently. Like, spoiler, we don't take a hard line on whether or not it's a bad idea to lose weight and train at the same time. But more importantly, Alex was just a great guest who provided a lot of really actionable information that could help you start seeing immediate improvements in your performance. And I'd like to as many people to hear that as possible. Hell, as a result of our conversation, I've actually made a couple of very small adjustments to my own eating patterns in ways that have been really beneficial in the 2 weeks since we've done this. We also got into carb loading, which is under-discussed, and she says it's arguably even more important than all the intra-race fueling that we're seeing from people like David Roche that is really in vogue right now. All to say, I should probably shut up and just let you hear what she has to say. Welcome back to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. Today I have an interview with Alex Larson. She is a registered dietitian, and we're going to talk about food and fueling and all the stuff that might help you run a little better. So Alex, how about you introduce yourself and tell us how you got into endurance athletes and how you became one yourself, and why you decided to pursue a career in food.
Yeah, well, thanks, Will, for having me. This is always fun and exciting for me to join in on podcast programs and talk about things that I'm just love nerding out on, and that's all things endurance nutrition. And I got into this honestly from my own endurance endeavors. So
Yeah.
when I was a baby dietitian, like 12 plus years ago, I was wanting to stay, fit and active. And so I got hooked into triathlon pretty quickly. I did a local triathlon after I graduated college. And then when I moved to this little town in southeast Minnesota, where I knew absolutely no one. I was working at a job where I was the only dietitian in a grocery store of all places. And I was in this the town's called Winona. It's a really wonderful
Yeah.
little town, little city. And I became like this yes girl, where if anyone was like, said, "Hey, do you want to be on this kickball team?" I was like, "Yes." Or like, "Hey, we have this local triathlon." I'm like, "I've done a triathlon before." Like, "Yes, I will do this triathlon." And I just became very active in that community. And they have a really great road cycling there. They've got lots of bluffs along the Mississippi River, so we could do a lot of hill repeats, and a really great running community, and a wonderful little YMCA where I could swim. And next thing I know, fast forward a few years from then, I was doing Ironman Wisconsin.
Awesome.
And when I crossed the finish line of that race, is where I really remember thinking, if I didn't know what I was doing with my nutrition, I don't know if I would have gotten through this race.
Fair.
And I saw a lot of people struggling in that race where I would imagine their nutrition was not too great. And so that's where I was like, I think I want to help my people. These are my
Love that.
people where they want to do really epic long distance events and I want to help them feel fantastic, start to finish throughout their training. Um, I want them to be able to do their long run on a Saturday morning and not feel like they're stuck to the couch the rest of the day, needing to nap and just veg out all day. I want them still to be functioning, happy adults. And yeah, that's kind of where this all kind of started. I started Alex Larson Nutrition a few years after I did Ironman. And I went full time in my business in 2021. And now I have a team of dietitians. I have two other dietitians that work with me to just meet our mission of having a world full of really well fueled endurance athletes.
That's awesome. So like who have you helped do what? And I guess like I ask this because I think oftentimes as coaches or clinicians, we're probably judged far too much in our own athletic prowess when it just doesn't matter that much in our ability to do our jobs. Like I like that we're in the community, right? But like I'm not a great runner and I probably never will be.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
totally a mediocre runner for sure.
exactly. But like I do I have trained some decent people. So like who do you tend to work with and like what have you helped them with?
Yeah. So I will say that, my how good of a runner I am isn't going to determine how great of a dietitian I am. But I
Hmm.
do feel like the fact that I've done endurance sports does help me just understand my clients better
I agree with
of
that.
like just the challenges of navigating life and fitting in training and a job and like raising kids, like all of that, and trying to still eat well. I get it. And so
Yeah.
I really can help validate athletes' feelings of how challenging it can be.
Hmm.
And I always say, like, I am 100% human first, and then I'm a dietitian. So I like wanting to have like desserts and pop tarts and gummy bears and like, yeah, let's use that to our advantage as athletes to still enjoy those foods but then optimize it so that you can perform really well. So we work with kind of a mixed bag now. It started out more triathlon heavy based clients, and now I feel like we're pretty even here with runners, cyclists, and triathletes. We have a pretty nice mixed bag of athletes, and we sometimes even get some like cross country skiers in there too, or like some mountaineers that like to scale, really epic high elevation stuff. Um, so, and then we'll have a variety of runners, some that do a little bit shorter distances, and some that go, 100 miles and do some of the really big long ultra distance races. Or we'll have we had a swimmer that she's training to swim the English Channel. So
That's awesome.
we get a really nice, fun variety,
I love that.
which I mean, it's just the best. Like, yeah, I'm like, you want to swim the English Channel? Hell yeah, let's like fuel you for that. Like, let's get your nutrition dialed in. I think that's just the coolest.
How long does an endeavor like swimming the English Channel take?
Oh gosh, I did ask her this. I mean, I think like 16 to 24 hours somewhere in
Oh
there. I can't
God.
remember.
So are
It was
you
a
like
lot. It was really long.
so do you have like a sport boat then? Like feeding like
I think
handing
so.
you
Yeah.
things?
Yeah.
That's wild.
For her, she felt like her like intro workout nutrition was pretty dialed in. But it's outside of where like the everyday day-to-day nutrition is where a lot of athletes need that help, because when you're training as frequently and as high volume as a lot of our ultra runners and triathletes and even the long distance cyclists are doing, you have to think of any time that you're eating outside of your training as an opportunity to help support recovery for yourself, because recovery for this high volume training isn't like a couple hours, it's days for your body to recover from this. And people underestimate that. And so you have to take advantage with your nutrition. You can't go into this mindset of like, oh my gosh, I just ran 20 miles. I can eat whatever the heck I want. No, you have to think of, I just ran 20 miles. I need to maximize nutrition so I can get the most out of that workout and I can bounce back fast. I got another long run coming up tomorrow, kind of thing.
Yeah. And there's so many directions to take that. So
I know, I'm
I
sorry.
no, I love that. And I think this is actually a thing that I see in general. I do want to actually get a little bit to in race stuff or like in workout or whatever. But I couldn't agree more that I think the biggest struggle people have is outside the actual training.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and part of it, I think, is just training takes a ton of time. Life is busy. Uh,
Yes.
it is hard, and then you have to eat 4,000 calories. Like it's just
It's
time
a
consuming,
full-time job.
right?
Yes, it's so
Yeah.
much work.
So like what have you found where people really struggle and like ways that they might be able to seek some improvements, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I would say the number one most common thing that we see from athletes is that they are backloading their nutrition for the day. So they are having a really skimpy breakfast because they're like trying to sleep in as much as possible, or they're getting their workout in. And so they're cutting it really close between the time they finish their workout to the time they need to get like started with their job. And so they're having this kind of like measly breakfast of maybe like a protein bar and some coffee. And then maybe having a somewhat decent lunch, maybe not. Maybe it's just like a sandwich with like a piece of cheese and veggies and like meat in there, and then
Yeah.
like maybe like a little something on the side of that. And then they're having this like dinner, which is usually pretty decent, and then they're like grazing throughout the whole rest of the evening because they're just super hungry. That's a really common theme that we see from a lot of athletes. And like if you're listening, you're like, oh my God, is she talking about me? Like, don't like don't be offended. It happens to like the best of us. So what we
I will
typically will
give you a bit
do
of a break there because like anybody who's listened to me long enough knows that that's like my innate eating pattern when I'm
is it
not being responsible. Yes, like I do, I've done so much better. But like I originally got into you probably don't know a ton about me. So like I got originally into this stuff because I was like kind of a fat teenager and then wanted to lose weight and then like did the intermittent fasting nonsense, the old school warrior diet thing, and then
sure.
like you just like set this feeding habit thing. And as a result, I don't eat well, and I have gotten a lot better over the past couple of years. But yeah, it's super normal for that to just kind of be how your day runs, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because
Mhm.
like eating during the day is kind of an afterthought because you're just trying to get through your day, getting all the things done. And I actually just got done with a client call before this, and that's exactly how her day is. She runs a business. She's super busy. Her job has always been the top priority. And I'm like, I need you to go to the grocery store tomorrow, not on Saturday, tomorrow, because you need to have some food in your house in order to eat well, in order for you to be the best business owner, have the best energy, still be able to do your training. Like, I need you to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Like, that was like basically our coaching call. So, like, and then she's like looking at her schedule. Oh yeah, I actually can go tomorrow. I'm like, yes, that is the number one priority. This purpose of this call is like get to the grocery store so that we can have you eat during the day because you actually have stuff available to eat. And so yeah, when we see athletes that are backloading their nutrition, we kind of flip flop it where we really prioritize a good decent breakfast, a much improved lunch. They'll have their typical dinner, and then they're like, I like was really satisfied in the evening. I'm not craving sugar like I used to. I'm like, yeah, it's because your body's actually like getting enough nutrition and it doesn't feel that need. So that's probably one of the most common ones is rearranging the timing of people's nutrition and getting enough protein too. If you're not getting a good breakfast, if you're not getting a good lunch in, and the most of your breakfast or most of your proteins just in the evening, you're never going to hit your protein targets of what you need to get, adequate protein to support recovery if you're skimping on those earlier meals.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I see that with my like work with people in the gym too. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to slam 3,000 calories into dinner, and as a result, you know, don't feel very good.
They
And,
feel terrible. They go to bed just super uncomfortable, and
yeah.
their body's like, I have to digest all this food and try and like rest. It doesn't go well. So it's funny how athletes are like, oh, I'm like sleeping way better now. And I'm like, yeah, it's because your body's in a really happy, non-stressed state because it actually is like recovering well from your workouts.
So like I know you love breakfast, and
I love breakfast so much. It's
what
my favorite.
what do you recommend for people so that they can like take some time to prioritize? Like, you clearly work with very busy people. I assume you're fairly busy yourself. You have children.
I have
That
3 young kids.
inherently
Yeah, I'm
leads
like
to being
constantly in a
busy.
rushing state.
So, how do you feed yourself in the morning, or like find time or make time to make that happen?
Yeah. So, and this is where I will walk through my clients' like morning routine. I'm like, tell me about your day. What time do you typically wake up? What's happening? And so, I can think of a few different examples. I had one mom who was, had kid drop off in the morning. And so she would have honestly like three different breakfasts. She would have her first breakfast, like, as she, and it was something very small and simple, like before they got in the car to do drop off, she would have something to like almost like a little like small protein shake in the car during drop off. And then when she got home and was starting her workday at her office, she would have kind of the final part of her breakfast. And so we had to get really strategic in just building that routine for herself. And she would notice immediately like her energy levels throughout the rest of the day. Her hunger was so much regulated. She wouldn't have those um like kind of like peaks and valleys in her energy levels and like in her hunger. So yeah, there's something magical about breakfast, and it just kind of sets you up to make better decisions with your food the rest of the day. For myself, it kind of depends on the morning and what time the I wake up and the kids wake up, because I hate setting an alarm, and usually one of my kids is up. So they're my alarm basically. Um, so sometimes I will make like a portion of my breakfast while I'm getting the kids out the door, or sometimes I'll wait until I just get home and then I'll have my breakfast. So typically I'll have a protein shake, which is around 33 grams of protein, because I'm like obsessed with this. It tastes just like a chocolate Wendy's Frosty, and I'm not even exaggerating. It's
What brand?
Thorns protein powder, the chocolate. It's
Nice.
the whey protein isolate with a cup of Fairlife chocolate milk, and then I blend it with ice. It tastes just like a Wendy's Frosty. I know that
That's
sounds weird
awesome.
at breakfast, but I'm like, this is my dessert and that I'm having in the morning.
I love
And then
that.
I'll usually have like a half a bagel with like some smoked salmon on it for a little bit extra protein, just so then I start my day with like 40 to 50 grams of protein. And then I know I usually will hit my protein target by the end of the day.
No, I love that. That sounds great. And like, um, pretty replicable too, even on a budget, right? I think that's an
Yeah,
important
except I
thing.
mean the smoked salmon's like my little splurge there, but you could do like eggs or some eggs or some egg whites, and easily make yourself something really easy that way. Or if athletes are really short in time, I'll have them batch cook up some scrambled eggs, maybe with some Canadian bacon in it or some veggies in it, add it to like a wrap with some cheese and wrap that up, and then have that just in the fridge for them to grab and go if they
Awesome.
really just have, it's just not an option for them really to be able to prep anything. It's just
Mhm.
doing something simple like that. Or if it could just be a couple pieces of toast and like a Greek yogurt cup. Like that would give you 50. I mean, if you put a little bit of peanut butter or some jam on there, you can get close to 20 grams right there.
I love that. So there's this idea that I, I think is probably outdated, but that this whole fasting thing, right? That we should be fasting through periods of our day to give our gut rest, and then glucose regulation and all this stuff. It's been very in vogue for the past, I'm sure you like the first half of your career. Um, and where do we see that it being? Is it true at all? And does it have any real crossover into endurance athletes? Like both of those feel really important as to, are we trying to apply a like fat loss diet to an endurance athlete, right? Like, where does this fall into the general program?
Yeah, there certainly are some research studies. I haven't dived into them super closely, but they do see some benefit gut health wise by doing some fasting. However, those research studies aren't done on athletes either. So I have a couple different thoughts here. I got to make sure I like explain this in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, take your time.
Intermittent fasting, which I jokingly call randomized starving, um,
Sorry, I like that a lot.
just does not work for athletes because, again, what I explained earlier about the recovery nutrition is you're like really cutting out some key time for you to support yourself and get the nutrition that you need because it's really hard to get enough, especially for some of those athletes that are doing high volume training. Um, I feel like if you are sleeping 7, 8 hours a night, that is adequate fasting in my mind to give your gut some time, a little rest. But I also have seen quite a few underfueled athletes who are doing some major restriction, whether that's intentional or not intentional. And that can really be bad for their gut health because when we are significantly underfueled, when we're having that low energy availability, an adaptation that our body will do is it will slow down our digestion in order to try and absorb every single little bit of like energy and nutrition from the food that we are eating. And so we'll see a lot of gut issues with runners who just are very underfueled. And then when we start getting them on a better schedule and getting adequate nutrition for them, their gut starts moving along better. And they're like, oh, I'm like not as bloated anymore. I'm actually having regular bowel movements. I'm not having like constipation. But then all of a sudden on my long run, I'm like having bathroom emergencies, like their body's just in a much happier state. There's not as much like stress response either because your body's getting enough fuel to actually function. Immune health is better. So I find with just a more, I guess, more traditional eating pattern, we see a lot better results than we do from those that are doing this randomized starving protocol.
Great. Sorry, I could tell like I couldn't agree more. Having been on both sides of it. And I you mentioned something about bloating, which I would actually like you to dive into a bit because I think it's super common with endurance athletes to experience like a pretty significant level of bloat. And sometimes there can be a bunch of reasons for bloat, obviously, but it's like I genuinely think a lot of the time it comes to this backloading of calories. Um, and just
Yeah, when you're having like really high volume foods all of a sudden
yeah,
and your body's just like overwhelmed by it. It
yeah,
takes a lot longer for your body to like break that down and digest it. And so that can be an issue. Also, I would say like fiber intake, if you're eating like a massive amount of fiber all at once, like having all of that ferment all at once can be very gas producing and a bloating feeling. Um, versus like if you're having that consistent supply of fiber throughout the day, that's a much easier like dose for your gut to handle, would be appropriate. I also like to look at ingredients of people's food. I had one athlete, oh, this was a few years ago, where she was like, yeah, I just keep having these bloating issues. And then finally I was looking at the protein powder she was using and I was like, I looked at the ingredient list. I'm like, this uses a lot of like inulin or like that chicory root extract, which is very gas producing. Like think of like a fiber one bar. Like I used to call it fart bars when I was a
uh-huh.
dietetic intern. Like I was like, this might actually be a culprit here. What's causing this like gas and bloating for you? And she had like no idea. So looking at some of those like added fiber things that they're throwing into all sorts of foods to try and make it healthier, which just I'm just like, why would you do this? Like this just drives me nuts. So like if you're gonna need more fiber in your diet, just eat some fruits and vegetables and more plant-based foods. Like don't be adding massive amounts of this added fiber to products.
Actually, I actually do have a question about that because I feel like there's two ends of this, right? Like there's the carnivore crowd who like feels like fiber isn't real or isn't necessary. And like all the studies refute that. And then on the other hand of the internet, it feels like there's some fiber Olympics that I'm somehow losing where people are bragging about consuming 110 grams of fiber in a day. And that just feels so
And then they
fucking
wonder
unnecessary to
why
me.
why they have like so many bowel issues when they're
Yeah.
running.
or they're doing fine, and I just can't fathom why. But I think it's like just equally dispersed. But like, how much do you actually? What's a reasonable amount of fiber for
Yeah.
a
So the
human?
recommendation for women is 25 grams a day, and for men, it's 36, I believe, 35, 36. So, yeah, definitely like if you're doing massive amounts of fiber and you're having GI issues on your runs, that would be probably the first place that I would start with our athletes is trying to cut back on some of that fiber intake and or like looking at timing of things too. You just that's just a lot of fiber. And sometimes when we see athletes that are eating that healthy, they're still actually underfueled because they're filling up so quickly on these like whole foods, but they're not actually getting enough calories to
Yeah,
support their body's needs. So there has to be kind of a fine balance there. Where we like, let's throw in a Pop Tart or two here, like if we get some more calories in. Because we gotta find a middle ground here. We got to get enough calories in, but we also I love the whole food based trend, but we have to that middle ground is really important.
I really appreciate that, and I think it's really complicated, right? And I work with like a wide range of people. Like in where I'm in the gym, it's often like fat loss and some muscle gain, and then
Mm-hmm.
on online, it's more what we're talking about, endurance athletes trying to run way too far. And the conversations are incredibly different. Like we have to be situationally appropriate, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
absolutely.
what you said, like if I eat all whole foods all day, I am full before I get enough calories to actually fuel my efforts of training. And I don't think that's that uncommon. What do you think on that front?
I don't know if it's necessarily like common, but for athletes that so with how my services work, we have
Sure.
a one-on-one nutrition coaching program, and we'll have athletes that will fill in an application, and then they'll jump on a call with me. And I will say, probably 9 times out of 10, when the athlete's like, "Yeah, I eat a really clean diet, a lot of whole food based," and I like immediately, I'm like, "Okay, yeah, you're going to be underfueled." Like I can just tell. Um, so if that's the type of like athlete that they are in terms of like what their focus is with their nutrition, I usually I'm like, okay, that's my initial red flag of like what I'm going to look for is like how many calories are you actually eating? How much protein are we actually getting in? Like how can we optimize this to support their needs and help alleviate some of the issues that they're struggling with? So
I,
I always like to look at every athlete as their own individual. Like yes, there is a lot of like cookie cutter, one size fits all advice that you'll see on the internet, but it has to, especially if there's unique goals like they want to get leaner and see improved body composition, but they're still doing some pretty high volume training, then we have to go in from a personalized aspect. There's no cookie cutter way of going about that route in order for them to see the best results.
so I'd actually really like to just talk about that for a second because I
Yeah.
think you see here's the complicated sphere or like spectrum of shit I see on the internet, right? Like on one hand, there was the Alberto Salazar route for way too long, right? Where we like underfueled athletes and like weighed them publicly. And I think been this big response that's probably healthier in the long term for the community of like, well, just fuel, that's insane. But you also see athletes like lining up as professionals where they do have a six pack and are fairly lean. And we know that it is the power to weight based like ratio sport to some degree. So clearly it's doable, but I feel like we have to be very fine-tuned. So like I would love to hear your opinions on this and like the complicated landscape because I by no means want to return to like red S being
Super
the
prevalent.
staple,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just a female losing her period, just being the fact of being an athlete. Like I think
Yeah,
that's
and
not
having that be normalized, like
right.
that's not
Like
good.
that's not where we need to be.
Yeah.
However, like telling people that fat loss and performance cannot be achieved at the same time, I also don't think is necessarily accurate. So what is like an honest
I
perspective on what we
yes.
got?
Oh my gosh, we're getting into the good stuff here. This is this is a very complicated subject, and I am kind of trying to work through it in my own head of how to go about sharing this messaging on like Instagram in a way that's not going to cause harm because
Agreed. Well, you can't
I
do it in a 60-second soundbite, so I feel you. Yeah.
yeah. So um if you're going to take anything from me being on this podcast, it's that if you're going to look at body composition while you're also a training athlete, you have to go about it from a personalized aspect with a dietitian. That is the only way that I've found it for it to be beneficial because from my aspect as a dietitian, I vet our athletes pretty heavily before we start working with them. I make sure that I understand their goals. Is their body composition goal realistic? Is their timeline realistic? Where is their mental health at in terms of their relationship with food and their body? Is it in a positive light? Is it not in a positive light? Do they have a history of eating disorders? Do they have a history of like being somewhere on the spectrum of red S or low energy availability? Are they prepared to do this the healthy way? And that is the slow and steady body composition results. There's no like quick fix, massive restriction. Um, we want to do this in a way that really preserves their health. What's their ovarian health like if they are a female athlete? I will vet all of that before I'm always like, yeah, this sounds great. We can certainly help with the body composition results.
Awesome.
So I take it very, very seriously in terms of not wanting to cause any harm for people. That being said, so we've kind of got a couple different camps. We've got, like you said, um, the old school way where, and there's still coaches to this day that are like, oh, if you want to run faster, you gotta lose like 10, 15, 20 pounds. Like,
Yep.
yeah, it's just like, where, where, where did that number come from, dude?
Sorry. Yeah, no, for real though. Like, why? Why is that
Yeah.
your number? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, we had a male triathlete that was like, oh, my coach wants me to get to this weight so I can qualify for Kona. And we're like, where did that number come from? Like, they just pull it out of their butt. And I'm like, this
Interesting.
makes me really frustrated because if they need to show up to the start of their race at that weight, and that's the only way that they're going to qualify for Kona, that's a really poor way of thinking about it. However, there
Yeah.
are certainly some athletes that can work on getting leaner and see performance improvement. It's not the end all be all. There's lots of other factors that influence performance, but um, I think we have to go about it in the right way, though.
Absolutely. And I mean, in a lot of these sports, we know there's a power to weight ratio component, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and you can basically, if everything goes perfectly smoothly, we can basically predict who's going to win certain stages of the tour, uh,
Mm-hmm.
with how much power they can generate and then their weight, because that's what matters on the climb.
Yeah, Pagacha, he can in his zone two does a 320 to 340 watts at his zone two.
He does. It's
What
unbelievable.
what the
1500
heck?
VAM in 15 minutes. Like, I just don't even understand. What a savage human being. However, like, if we take the fact that this does matter, but I also do really appreciate that we're kind of moving away from it, and it bothers me, like, 'cause it clearly does you, that somebody's just tossing out random start line weights, right? Like that feels insane. So like how can we maybe know what is realistic? Like how much do these things matter? Do they matter? Like where does all this line
Yeah,
in?
I mean, you have to look at like the person's body type, right? There's like some people that just naturally are like a more shorter, stockier build versus someone that might be more tall and like gangly limbed person. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like there's just different body types out there. If everyone ate exactly the same and exercised exactly the same, we still would all look differently, right? So we have to kind of keep that in mind. We also have to look at their lifestyle too. You know, some people just like have a their lifestyle's just bananas, and for them to eat a certain way in order to maintain a certain body type is just too unrealistic. And so we need to kind of work with that as well and kind of find like where is their body composition at that's easily for them to maintain, because it's not just about like achieving that body comp, it's also about maintaining it, like, and not that they have to be the same exact weight all year round. I think we certainly can have a kind of a periodized phase of life of like in your off season, you can be a couple pounds up versus like in season training you can be a little bit leaner because you're doing more high volume of training. I think we need to kind of normalize that. um but yeah, it's, I don't know if there's like a formula to determine someone's like ideal race weight.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think it's actually a fairly harmful concept. And I say this like, um, I am on the shorter, stockier side of things.
Mm-hmm.
My legs are gonna be huge, whether I ever train them again in my life. Like it's just a genetic thing, right?
Yeah.
And as a result, taking a, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't probably be I know for a fact I wouldn't be the ideal endurance athlete anyway. I'd probably be much more of a sprinter, but it's,
Yeah. Same.
yeah, but like when you're built like me and you do like to do these long things and you look up like what a race weight might be for someone who's 5'7", like that's the weight in my legs. It's insane, right? Like, so it's just taking a framing of what might be realistic and you, hey, maybe you like pizza here and there. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's a complicated conversation and I really do
Yeah.
appreciate that you're both willing to have it, but also like it just takes personalization. Like there isn't a great
Yeah.
answer for the internet.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I love the trend we're in right now of like love your body where and at any size, like health at any size. Like I love that trend. But I also do also I also want to validate people's interests in getting leaner too.
Yeah,
Because sometimes I feel like I have athletes that come to me and they're like embarrassed to tell me they want to lose some weight. And I'm like, do not feel embarrassed. It's okay. Like, tell me what your goal is. What are you visualizing? I just spell it all out to me. Like, I'm not going to judge you and what your goals are. I just want to make sure that they're realistic and we can do this in a really good way for you. And I don't want them to feel embarrassed with wanting to lose weight.
I agree entirely.
That's kind of a weird shift that we've made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a place to be like we can be honest about this on both ends too, right? Like I'm in
Mm-hmm.
the fitness space that I think they like weaponize weight loss in a way that doesn't that has definitely done harm to me in the past. And I'm not a great proponent of I refuse to participate in it a lot of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where 10 pounds is not going to be the difference between you and a heart attack, probably, right? Unless it's all visceral fat, which it never is that. Right? So it's like
Mm-hmm.
that's it's an insane thing to put on the internet that we've done for a very long time. But also if you want to lose like this, great. Let's try and see if we can do that. It's just we should be honest about it. That's all. I just wish we were
Mm-hmm.
more honest.
Yeah, and I want people to go into it thinking like, "Hey, we're not doing this because you're going to be on. You're not eating this way because you're on a diet. We are
Yeah.
trying to optimize nutrition to support your training, also for you just to have a healthier, stronger body,
Yeah.
and not that losing weight necessarily equates to healthier. I should add that in there,
Mhm.
but like I want people as like as we're going through the process and they're seeing weight loss, I'm like, okay, I want you to remind yourself that how you're eating right now is not a temporary thing. We're trying to build like lifelong habits so that this is something that's sustainable for you. And so if this is feeling like a big stretch for you to maintain this, then we might need to dial it back a little bit and try and find a little bit happier medium ground for you.
I really appreciate that. I mean, I say the same kind of thing with training, right? Like you end up, people set whatever is a big goal to like kickstart progress or training or whatever. And um, I probably talk more people out of running, at least at the gym, than I do into it, right? Because like,
Well, if they're starting running because they want to lose weight, I don't think that's a really good
yeah,
way to go about
that's
doing it.
really the one. They're like, I want to get healthy, and you're like the running guy at the gym, and I'm like, you should probably like lift weights and hop on the stair wheel, and that's okay, right? Like,
Yeah.
And they usually do that and they're really happy because they don't actually want to run a marathon. They just want to kickstart something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And
yeah,
I get signing up for a race in order to have a goal to work for.
me
I
too.
do that all the
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah.
Like I just got done with a couple races and I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do now? I'm like, I know what I need to do, but I'm just like kind of in this weird limbo of like trying to get started with like some more strength training and like
Yeah.
getting on the bike a little more. But it's like that transition always can be tough.
Yeah, I'm far from I'm not against the big goal. I just think it should be a goal you actually kind of want to achieve, right? Like I have no real
Yeah.
desire to become a distance swimmer. So me signing up for a distance swim thing would be crazy.
Yeah.
I should just do running stuff because I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree.
So let's move to a little bit of like unless you had more to say on that, because I do, again, it's a complicated conversation and I really appreciate you being willing to have it. But I think to some degree it is just so individualized that
Yeah. I just want people to know that it is definitely possible for people to get leaner, see some weight loss, and also train. We do it all the time in my program. But I'm going to vet you pretty heavily when you come into the program to make sure, like, just be prepared for me to like ask lots of questions and then ask it maybe a second time just to make sure I fully understand and didn't miss anything, so that we go about doing this in the right way. But I
okay.
do see some sports dietitians that are like, absolutely not. We don't recommend like weight loss during training. And and that's how I used to be. And I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to validate people's feelings in this. And like, if their goal is to just finish the marathon and, but also like lose some weight, then yeah, let's go about doing that in a way that works for them.
I appreciate that. And again, I also just appreciate having the conversation because you see professional athletes lose weight as they peak towards a marathon. So it's not like it's not
Honestly, I see
possible.
some of them and I'm like, you're looking a little too lean.
Yes, I understand that as well. But like,
Like,
it's not like it's
like
not
like
possible, right?
Dakota Lindworm, for example, at the Olympics, she looked great. Like she looked so solid. Fiona, I was like, well, even at the trials, I was like, Fiona, you're looking really lean. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm a little worried.
Yeah. No, I mean, I cross a lot in the generalized fitness space, which means I see a lot of bodybuilders and like nobody on a bodybuilding stage is ready to go run a marathon. If you ever talk to these people, like it's literally too exhausting to get up and go get the remote a lot of the time. For them to change a channel, they're not going to run a marathon well. It's just not that level of leanness doesn't pair.
Yeah, there's a
So
reason why I don't work with bodybuilders. That's like wild. Like, I don't know if this is healthy.
it's a whole thing that I don't either for a very good reason. Um, so on that, if you're looking to, I assume you have people track their food to some degree,
We do.
and
Yep. It's a part of our process. Not because they're on a diet again, but because it's a really good learning tool in them actually visually seeing how their food choices that they make translates to how much nutrition they're providing their body, which translates to how are they feeling in their day to day? How are their energy levels changing over time as we adjust their nutrition? How is their performance in their workouts changing? Um, how is their body composition changing? Like it helps for them in seeing that, which is a very important part of our process because my goal is always for them to graduate from our program with a really good understanding and full clarity on how to fuel themselves based off of their training without having to journal for the rest of their life. So we have to kind of go through that process in order for them to feel really confident in their food choices without having to journal. Because over time, as they journal, they're like, oh, I'm starting to get a really good idea of how this works. And I'm like, yeah, okay, yep, we're getting to that point where we can wean you off the journal.
yeah, and I think people don't realize that it's just that helpful, right? I
Well,
don't
because
know. I
it's
would love
tedious.
your.
It sucks to journal. Like no one
Yes,
loves
it
it.
does. It sucks.
I have a
I tell
few
people this
select
all the time.
athletes that love journaling. They will journal for the rest of their life because they just love it.
Yep.
I don't. I'm like, this sucks. Like, even though it takes like 10 minutes out of my day, like it's not my favorite. So, but you have to go through the work in order
Yeah.
to get to that point. Because I hear so many athletes that are like, I'm so confused. I don't know if I'm eating enough. I don't know if I'm eating too little. I don't know if I'm getting enough protein. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, we have to get you to that point where you can confidently say that. And the only way we can really do that is by taking a journal and you learn with us.
100%. And I feel like this is a thing that like somehow inherently understand with training and yet often miss with food, where it's like you, if you never like see what your times are at whatever distance, then you don't actually know what I just want to get better, right? Like that doesn't mean anything because you won't
Mm-hmm.
actually know if you're making improvements or not, or
Mm-hmm.
you won't know where your baseline is, you won't know what you're doing, or like if you never track training, then we probably aren't going to see a lot of progress. And I kind of feel the same way with food, and yet it's almost like more of an allergic reaction with food where it's like, oh, I don't want to do that. That feels disordered. And I know it can lead to that, don't get me wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But
And that's why I like ask people, I'm like, where's your mental health at now that we're journaling?
yeah,
If they're feeling anxious about it, I'm like, okay, we're pivoting, we're doing something different here
awesome.
because I just don't want to trigger any bad disordered eating.
Hmm.
It doesn't happen too often, but there's some little tricks that I do. We have a platform where we can turn off the nutritional data so they
Nice.
can still journal, but I can still see the numbers. And
I
so I
love
can
that.
talk through, like, okay, you're still short on protein. Let's find some different ways that we can add some more protein to your routine. Um, so that can be helpful for some athletes too. So yeah, I got some tricks and like things that are in my tool belt that I can help people navigate through that too, which is helpful.
Super helpful. Because yeah, I mean, I know it can trigger that, but I do think that I don't know. Even as someone who knows quite a bit about food and whatever, it would be difficult for me to make a lot of changes without seeing what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And for us, the more that we know about how our athletes are eating, the better personalized advice and feedback we can provide. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an important part of our process.
Yeah,
Um, it's not,
absolutely.
I mean, the goal of our program isn't to get really good at journaling your food. That's not the objective. And I
Yes.
tell them that when they're like, oh, I didn't journal real well this week. I'm like, that's not the goal of this program. I just want you to eat better. And
Yeah.
it's helpful for me to see what you're eating. But if you can be honest in reporting it to me, in our calls, then we can still get to where we need to be. Just a little bit more challenging.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. So race day stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how do you recommend where do I want to go here? There's a lot of different advice when it comes to fueling for race day, and I know a lot of it's going to depend on the distance. So,
Mm-hmm.
but especially as someone who tends to work more with ultramarathoners, fuel is going to be one of the biggest limiters of performance, right? Like we know
Absolutely.
for
And
America,
hydration. I will
yeah,
say that too.
me too. I harp on it all the time, so I really appreciate you saying that. But like when we look at like Steve Magnus even talks about running a professional marathon, technically your biggest limiter for that distance is going to be how many carbohydrates are on board and your ability
Mm-hmm.
to take them in. So
Yeah.
like when does it really start to matter? How many might we be targeting? We see people pushing 120 up to
Yeah.
these days, and it seems like a lot because like I don't know. I would actually love an answer to this. Like at last I heard, there was 90 grams worth of intestinal transporters, and that seems to be wrong. Has that changed? Do we know why this works? And then like how do we like get our hydration and sodium on board? Because I see such a disparity between people on this front so that we can fuel well.
Okay. Where do we want to start? Because there's a
Anywhere
lot.
you want. Yeah, there's a lot.
Anywhere? Okay. So let's start with how the you asked the question of like when do people start fueling
Hmm.
during, right? Okay.
Yeah. Like when
So
does it start to matter?
typically, yeah, if you're exercising for I'd say longer than like 60, 75 minutes, somewhere in there, then you want to start adding in some fuel during, right? Because if you look at it's all about muscle glycogen stores when you look at this. So think of your muscle glycogen stores as a battery. So our body takes carbohydrates, stores it as glycogen in the muscles to use as energy during exercise. And um, so this is not, we're not talking fat adaptation here because it's a whole nother ballgame of like craziness. So I'm team carbs here if people haven't picked up on that yet. So
Me too.
um you go into your workout, hopefully you have fueled beforehand, right? Taking in some carbs beforehand because that fresh energy is really going to help spare that glycogen so that you can go longer without fatiguing. Because when our glycogen stores are fully loaded, okay, like after a carb load, you have around 90 to 120 minutes worth of energy in there, give or take, depending on how intense of an effort you're running at. So 60 to 75 minutes is usually that mark where I'm like, okay, yeah, it's time for us to start taking in some fuel during hands so we can get you through that workout start to finish feeling really great and not finishing the workout feeling like absolute poo. Okay.
Yeah.
We want you to feel somewhat decent afterwards. I hate it when people finish their workouts and they just feel like death the rest of the day because they're just so depleted, and that's not good. Um, so with those shorter workouts, like 30, 40, 60 grams of carbohydrate somewhere in there during that time frame is fine. If you're in that like 60 to 2.5 hour mark, you're looking at 30 to 60 grams there. If you're going over the 2.5 mark, that's where we're getting to the 60 to 90 plus grams of carb an hour. An hour. Okay. Not just like total, but per hour, 60 to 90 grams. That can be a lot of fuel if someone hasn't been doing that before. It can feel really overwhelming. And this is where gut tolerability comes into play. So if you
Mm-hmm.
are someone that has really underfueled your workouts before, you're going to have to start slowly and gradually and build up that gut tolerability. Some people are an iron stomach and they can tolerate just about anything, like David Roche, for example. That man is insane. Okay.
Yes,
He did like what,
absolutely.
136 grams of carb an hour for
It
Leadville 100,
did
something
for
like that.
Leadville. Yeah, it was wild. I've definitely
It
brought
was
him up on here before.
wild. Okay. And so my concern is though that people are going to look at what he did and then just like try and do that and have it be a complete disaster.
Yep.
That like everyone's a little bit different. Some people are just a much more finicky stomach, and we have to really kind of figure out what's the best avenue for them to go to tolerate that much fuel per hour.
Yep.
And you have to also think of the evolution of where we've come in nutrition. So 10 years ago, when I did Ironman Wisconsin, the recommendations back then were like 30 to 60 grams of carb an hour for like a full Ironman,
Interesting. Cool.
right?
Yeah.
And so now we've shifted to this 60 to 90. And then now we're kind of like, oh, okay, we've got elite cyclists, we've got elite triathletes, we've got high level runners, ultra runners doing 120 plus. And like, where's the limit? We
Yeah.
aren't on it. Honestly, we're not even quite sure. Because if you think about 10 years ago, this is what we knew in the research was 30 to 60 grams. And now we're like at this whole other level. So I'm very fascinated to see where the research takes us over the next 10 years.
Me
Very
too.
fascinated. Um, we're just going to continue learning, which is really just fun in my, like, I'm just a total nerd on this stuff. So, yeah, I have a cyclist client who messaged me and she's like, hey, I've been doing 100 grams of carb an hour. Is that like too much for me? And she's like a pretty petite, like female cyclist. I was like, if you feel great on that and your stomach is tolerating it, I'm like, go for it. She's like, oh, great. Cause I feel really good on it. I'm like, yeah, like do it. And
That's
then
awesome.
I've had some athletes who try and go above 90 and it just doesn't feel right for them.
It's
So
fair.
everyone's a little bit different. Um, but you can certainly try and push the envelope. I certainly have. We had a triathlete this summer who, I mean, the guy trains a ton. He has a very active job. And so he, most days, will have 500 to 600 grams of carb just in a normal day. And then it was his workouts. Eventually, I was like, we just got to try 120 because I think you can do it. And he's like, yeah, totally felt great. He had to dial it back a little bit as he finished the bike to go into the run without like a little bit. He had a little bit of nausea if he like did 120 up until that second transition. So we had to adjust that a little bit. But yeah, like for him, I'm like, yeah, you're at the tippy top, man, and let's go for it.
God, that's
He
awesome.
was also like, just one of those guys that just like his body just thrives on a lot of carbs.
So here's two two directions from that. Is there seemingly an individual variance about like people who thrive on more carbs and not? And then on that, you'll almost inevitably get the question, or at least I do, when we talk about these higher carb intakes during running, that they're worried they're going to somehow end up with diabetes due to sugar intake. Like
Yeah.
thoughts on both of those?
Okay, let's start with the diabetes one and
Yeah.
then we'll circle back to the other one. So when we are exercising, this is something that a lot of people don't really understand. Um, how our body metabolizes sugar and like handles it during exercise is a little bit different. Instead of, when you're not being active, you consume sugar, your blood sugar rises, your body will release insulin and then store that that energy, right? During exercise, it's going straight to the muscle and
Mhm.
getting used as energy. It's sparing the glycogen because our body is like smart. It's like, I'm going to spare this. I'm going to keep this extra stuff just in case, but I'm going to use the stuff I have that's fresh. It's going to go right to our muscles and get used. There's going to not be there's a very, very minimal insulin response. So for a lot of our athletes, especially ones that are looking to lose weight, we're like, no, we want you to fuel the crap out of this workout because that carbs that you're taking in, it's like a freebie. It's going straight to your muscles using getting used as energy. And that way you're not going in like into your recovery period at a huge massive deficit and you're trying to like catch up. And then your body's like having to deal with that. So from the diabetes aspect, the sugar that you're taking in during a workout is not going to cause diabetes. Diabetes is multi factors that go into what causes diabetes, but exercise in itself is going to decrease insulin resistance. It's going to has lots of benefits, and so I don't worry about the sugar intake for athletes
I
with
really
that.
appreciate that. I I've just had the conversation so many times I had to ask, but I did have a client once. He was working with a dietitian because he was reactive hypoglycemic.
Mm.
So he was testing his blood sugar a lot and on a CGM and like would occasionally finger prick it to double test and did drop really low on intake for sugar for a while they regulated it. And then he was kind of concerned to increase. But between me and dietitian, he started playing with it. And like even on finger prick, as long as it was during workouts, nothing. Outside of workouts, real bad. But during workouts, nothing. It's really interesting. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. Kind of reframes like how the body processes stuff when you get that much data. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I always find it interesting when athletes, perfectly healthy athletes with a perfectly functioning pancreas, will get a CGM,
Yeah, that
and
was
they're
not
they're
him,
like,
but
"Oh
I
my
couldn't
gosh, I
agree
learned
more.
so much. This is what I learned," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly how your body is supposed to respond. Like this is not shocking news for me."
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I see them all the time, and I'm just like, you're cool.
Yeah, good
Cool.
for you, buddy.
But, and then as far as like, is there going to be, does it seem like there's some kind of like genetic variance on who can process more carbs? Is the thing like we should all try
Oh
to
yeah,
build
yeah.
towards or like whatever?
Um, there's those like you read about the different body types, the theory of like ectomorph,
Sure.
mesomorph, endomorph. And I do feel like the people that seem to maintain their weight very easily can lose weight very easily, even struggle to gain weight easily. Um, which would be this gentleman, this triathlete that has like 500-600 grams of carb a day, would be that body type. He's very like long and lean. Granted, like his job, he walks 15,000 steps just in his job every day, and then on top of that, he's doing all this training. So like he is burning through carbs like
Sure.
it's his job. So that's a little bit different perspective from there. But you look at like some of those elite marathon runners, like from like Ethiopia and Kenya, their diet is mainly carbohydrate. Like it's very heavy carb
Yeah.
over there. And so yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is. I don't know, I can't say for certain, but I would educate a guess that they are just ones that very much efficiently use carbs as energy.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So I guess back to the fueling thing. You had mentioned hydration, which is something I
Mm.
harp on a lot. Um, what are your strategies for figuring out like hydration in athletes, especially ones like you work with Ironman athletes, they're out there forever. So like what do
Yeah.
we do to help those people?
Yeah, and sweat rate is so personalized. Some people are just like massive heavy sweaters, and other people are like, they don't really sweat at all. So
Hmm.
we have to kind of learn where are you at? And so doing like a very simple at-home sweat test where you weigh yourself before, after a workout, measure how much fluids you took during, kind of calculate, okay, what's your typical sweat rate? What is it in hot conditions? What is it in cold conditions? What is it at a really high effort level exercise? What is it at an easy zone two effort? Like understanding someone's sweat rate can be really valuable because then we can figure out, okay, how long is your race going to be? What's the temperatures? How much are we estimating you're going to be losing in fluids and sweat? Okay, how much do we need to be taking in every 15, 20 minutes to keep you from getting too dehydrated? A little bit of dehydration is fine. They say like 2-3% body weight loss you can tolerate. Some can maybe tolerate up to 4%, but that's kind of individual. Especially with ultra runners, sometimes I feel like their body just adapts a little bit to tolerating a little bit more dehydration. Um, and then getting on a really good hydration schedule in order to support like adequate hydration levels during a race. So if you're out there all day long, maybe a multi-day, we might be looking at trying to be close to like 95 to 100% of replacement versus like a marathon, we could do like more like 75% and get you
Awesome.
through just fine.
That makes a ton of sense to me and what I've seen. And if we're, I don't know, I don't know how to phrase that part. So how do we play with the sodium aspect of it first? And then I'll figure out how to ask my other question. So I know like the
Yeah.
sodium and electrolytes play a huge role here to proper hydration so that we don't end up like either hyper or hyponatremic. In addition to like we can kind of manipulate them a little bit to deal with super sweaters or whatever. So like how do you figure out sodium loss?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I'm honestly still kind of refining how we go about doing that with athletes. And so, like for me, in talking with like my network of sports dietitians, we really like precision hydrations sweat tests. You can go on their website and look up different testing locations. It's usually around like $100, $200 somewhere in there, depending on the person, and like because they will do a little consultation with you. But they basically put a little sensor on your arm, puts in a little electro pulses in there. It signals your body to sweat as if you're doing a really like hard high effort exercise. They'll collect that sweat, they'll measure the sodium levels in there, and they'll give you like on it, like saying, okay, at a really high effort, your max is around X amount of milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. So I had this done back in May. Super salty sweater, was really shocked. It was like 1,700 milligrams of sodium per liter of sweat. And then when I raced the other day and it was really hot out and like my whole face was just like so gritty, I was like, oh, okay, this is tracking now. Like, why did I not recognize this before? um, so I've been a little bit more conscious of my electrolyte intake now. Um, but yeah, so learning that can be helpful. I mean, obviously, like I'm not always going to be going at like a full effort in like 100-degree weather, high humidity. So like I can scale it down a bit as well. But it's just a really good thing to know of like, are you a salty sweater? Are you not? Usually most people will have an idea because they'll have like salt stains on their clothes or on their skin, or like their whole shirt will be just like white when they get done with a really long race. That's a huge indicator that you're losing quite a bit of salt. And we need to make sure that we're concentrating your fluids with a decent amount. A good starting point, I would say, would be anywhere from like 300 to 500 milligrams per liter of fluids. But
Awesome.
some of the saltier sweaters, we certainly can increase that
Yeah.
and kind of playing around with it and see what feels best for people, especially for those longer distance races. Sometimes it's nice to get a little head start on that so that we don't end up with that hyponatremia risk.
Absolutely. And does sodium loss, pardon me, does sodium loss in some way relate to like daily intake? Like if you eat a bunch of salt, like if you're in, I don't know, excess or just high in consumption throughout the day, do you lose more? Or like how would that interplay?
I, that is something I feel like they still need to kind of research.
Because I've heard myths both directions and I honestly wasn't
Yeah,
sure.
I know that's the thing. Like you hear these kind of like weird concepts and you're like, oh, well, the research isn't really like fully clear on this.
Got
So,
it.
um, a lot of the electrolyte stuff is based off of some theories. I mean,
Awesome.
good, so like
Yeah,
decent
sure.
theories, but like we still need to kind of study it. But they do have some research that shows that it can impact, like, and it can benefit performance by taking in electrolytes during your workouts. So that for sure has kind of been shown in the research that there is a performance benefit to including them. So, but in terms of like the fine tuning of it, because it's so highly individualized, that's where it gets a little tricky.
Interesting. Because yeah, like I think this is one of these that's probably hard to study for a lot of reasons and probably not high on the priority list because salt is cheap, right? So it's just not going to be your biggest like selling product, and that's fine. Like that's research is
Yeah.
expensive, right? But
Yeah.
like it is one of these massive disparities you see between like athletic and non-athletic populations. Because like I have a friend who's a kidney doctor, and she spends most of her day recommending that people stay below an amount of sodium that I have people take sometimes per hour
Yeah,
during
I know.
exercise.
It's a very different situation
And like neither of us are
with
wrong,
that.
right? Like
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's very true. I mean, same with like people who work specifically with like eating disorder clients.
Hmm.
Like they're going to have a very different perspective on someone like me who doesn't work with athletes that have eating disorders. I will refer them out if I get any like vibes of like, oh, we got an eating disorder going on. I will refer
Hmm.
them out to someone else because I'm like, that's not an area that I specialize in. And so I have a little bit different perspective in that. And no one's right or wrong. It's just different.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. But there's other electrolytes is a thing I'd like to ask about because this is
Hmm.
the one that seems like sodium we know matters. So you might end up in a hospital. Like
Yeah,
the
well, and
other
it's the
ones,
main
like
electrolyte that people are
sure,
losing. Yeah.
yeah. As far as like potassium and magnesium and these things that you'll often see included, um, how much do they seem to matter? Do you think they might matter at longer distances a little more? Um, where are we on this?
Well, I mean, I haven't really seen like specific recommendations of like how much magnesium you should be taking per hour. Like, and most people will have, from my understanding at least, most people will have a decent enough like storage of potassium that they won't have like a low potassium level because of
Mm.
their
Hmm.
exercise. And most electrolyte products will have some of that other stuff in there in
Mm.
order to kind of support the minimal losses, like the trace losses that they'll have in sweat. So um, they're certainly important, but they're not the star of the show like sodium is.
Makes sense. So I I guess my last question that I really wanted to touch with you that seems like miss tough to figure out is a carb load, right? So like
Oh,
I feel
yeah.
like since whenever I was in high school, it used to just be a large pasta dinner before going out, and then you'd hit your sports day really bloated.
So much more than that now.
So yeah, exactly. So like where are we on carb loading? Does it matter for people who are not like trying to perform really well? How do you do one properly that doesn't lead to just like 2 pounds of pasta sitting in your stomach when you're trying to sleep? What are good ways to do this?
Yeah. So after David Roche did Leadville 100, my team and I, so Mary on my team, who's like my running guru, she's done a ton of marathons. She works with a lot of our running athletes. And so we were chatting in a little group chat about um, carb intake and what he had done with his nutrition. And she's like, she goes, honestly, she goes, if people aren't properly carb loading, I don't care how many grams of carb an hour they're taking in during their race. She goes, if they didn't properly carb load, they are not going to be able to save their soul. And I just was laughing so hard. It's so true because you really have to do your prep work going into an ultra race because
Mm,
you are going to be out there for so many hours. You have to go in with fully loaded glycogen levels in order for you to be able to get through that race without leaving a part of your soul out on the course. Um, so
yeah.
carb loading these days is a multi-day event. It's an event in itself. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of fueling. It's not just a little pasta dinner the night before. So we're looking at anywhere from like 8 to 12 grams of carb per kilogram of body weight. And you can kind of divide that out among like 2, 3 days in order to get those glycogen levels like super loaded. Um, and you want to start earlier on in the day because if you're going to be doing that much carbs and you're skipping a meal, there's no way that you are going to get enough carbs in unless you're like drinking just straight up like super high carb scratch like all day long in order to get to your carbs in. Um,
So, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
8 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight is a shitload. Is that is that per day, and for how many days? And is that for like only elite athletes, or if you're also trying to perform at your like individual best?
I don't care if you run a 6 hour marathon or a 2 hour 1 minute marathon. You know what I mean? Like I want you carb loading
Sweet.
because you still have to go the distance. You're still out there for a good amount of time. Um, if you're out there, the longer you're out there, the more days I typically like our athletes to go. If they're doing the math and carbs and they're like, there's no way in hell I can eat that much in a day. I'm like, that's fine. We'll just add an extra day on to your carb loading and kind of taper down that amount. We'll kind of work with them and like what is doable. So like I had an athlete the other day where I'm like, we're gonna do a trial carb load, and I'm like, I'd like you to do, I think I said 600 grams of carb, and he's like, that's a lot. And I'm like, okay, let's adjust that and see how 500 to 550 feels for you, and then because that's why we like to trial it to see like
Hmm.
what's doable for them, and that way we can go into the race week and kind of put together a plan, like knowing we're going to fully load those glycogen stores. Um, so there's no like set rule of like how many days they have to go, but I'll say, okay, we need to get at least this much grams of carbs in. Let's kind of divide it out over a few days to get you feeling really good on race day. And the number one rule with carb loading is you do not weigh yourself during carb loading. For the love of God, do not weigh yourself
Oh yeah, that's
because
fair.
you're going to gain about like anywhere from like 3 to 6 pounds in there because for every gram of glycogen you're storing about 3 grams of water. It's a lot of water weight. If you're waking up the morning of the race and you're feeling a little bit like a puffed up chip bag, you know you did it right. Okay. It's a good thing because that hydration, that glycogen is what's going to get you through that race feeling good. It's where when the wheels fall off in the final 10K of a marathon for athletes, it's not for you. You're going to actually have like some decent energy going into that final 10K. You're going to be passing people because you're going to feel so strong. You're going to recover faster from the workout or from the race. We tend to see athletes return back to their weight quicker when they've carb loaded because their body is just way less stressed and it just comes back so much faster.
Awesome. So if I'm 80 kilos, that'd be like 800 grams of carbohydrates
Yeah, you
ish,
could
right?
do yeah, you could do like so if you do like a 2 day carb load, you could do like 400 or 500 grams of carb each day.
Okay. So you're trying to get an aggregate amount over like a 2 to 3 day period. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like I'm pushing 800 grams a day.
Yeah, I've certainly seen some athletes that will do like 700, 800 grams of carb a day, and that I'm like, how are you doing that? But they get it down.
Okay. But we're kind of using that like 2-ish day glycogen restore and just pushing the total over that amount of time.
Yeah, I and
Got it.
what is helpful is using the journal for a carb load and
Sure.
actually pre-entering it in advance of what your plan is. So you know, okay, this is my plan for the day. Um, I would trial it using your long runs as a way to
Got it.
practice. And also you feel really great in your long runs and you have like you bounce back from them really quick. And that way you can go to race week and you're like, I already have done this before. I know what I need to do to get my carbs in. And it's just one less thing for you to worry about.
That's cool. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. It really it's a game changer. It's really fun from my aspect when I have an athlete do a proper carb load for the first time, like during a training workout, and they're like, "Oh my God, I was like biking circles around my friends as they were sitting in the parking lot, like exhausted." And I felt amazing. I was like, "Yep, that's what she's like totally sold from that point on carb loading."
I love that. Um, yeah, carbs are magic. I don't say they're
They
great.
give you superpowers.
They are rocket fuel. What else should we understand about nutrition or about you or anything? I think we've tied up pretty much all the questions or loose ends or whatever. Um, yeah. What else do we need to know? What should we target? What do people miss that we haven't discussed so
I
far?
think, it's important when you look at nutrition that it's an evolution. So we're going to continue to learn more and more about it. Like there's no one size fits all approach. You have to just find what works best for you. And um, don't take your nutrition advice from random people on the internet. Like make sure they have credentials and experience in that area. And just because like they lost weight while running doesn't mean that their approach is going to work for you. So, and don't do anything new on race day. Oh God, do not do that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been really helpful. Um, where can people find you? I guess is the question I should probably ask here.
Yeah.
And I will make sure to include this in the intro as well, because in case someone doesn't make it this far, but where would you prefer people find you?
So they can find me at alexlarsonnutrition.com is my website. And then if you're on social channels, same at Alex Larson Nutrition. I spend most of my time on Instagram and a little bit on Facebook. And I have a really epic blog now. My team and I set a goal a couple of years ago. We are going to have the best endurance nutrition blog on the internet, and we're really close to getting there. It is got a very wide, diverse range of topics and information, and we're working on recipes right now.
Awesome.
So, lots of really good resources there. And then I do have some YouTube videos as well. And then I'm launching my own podcast episode on endurance nutrition. It'll be called Endurance Eats. And that you can subscribe to already. I've got a trailer up, but it won't officially launch until January of 2025.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, hang out for one sec, everybody else. Thank you for being here, and I will be back soon with another one. Thank you again for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Just a reminder, nothing you hear on this podcast is medical advice, and you should always speak with a medical professional before making changes to your training or your nutrition. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please leave a rating or review. It tells the algorithm robots that people like it, and that means more people will hear it. Or even better, just share it with someone who you think would benefit. If you prefer a video version, head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook or check out the Mountain Goat Endurance Coaching YouTube channel. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great next run.